Cuba's National Assembly begins a session that will reshape the government. The post of Prime Minister is to return. After a marathon session, Argentina's lower house passes the new government's bill to reboot the economy and redistribute wealth. And Ethiopia becomes the 11th African country to launch its own satellite into space with aid from China. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo and this is From the South. Cuba is beginning to introduce its new government structure, including the return of the post of Prime Minister. The National Assembly of Popular Power is beginning a two-day session that is expected to adopt important measures to improve economic planning. On Saturday, it will name the new Prime Minister alongside other ministers. The new form of government was part of Cuba's new constitution, approved in a referendum last February. Our correspondent in Havana, Nayara Tardo, is at the parliament.
The fourth period of the National Assembly of Popular Power has now opened here in Havana to put into effect the new aspects of the Constitution. The session has begun with an analysis of Cuba's economic performance this year and the forecast for next year. They are also looking at the budget for next year and reorganizing the Assembly's various committees. They are expected to adopt laws dealing with these two aspects, and a third on the new structure of local assemblies. One of the most important moments of this session will be the election tomorrow of a Prime Minister, as decided in the new Constitution. This post was abolished in the Constitution of 1976, but the Constitution adopted last February reintroduces the post. President Miguel Díaz-Canel will propose a name for Prime Minister, and the Assembly will then decide on it. The aim of this new structure is to make the whole administrative process more agile and efficient.
In the early hours of the morning, the lower house of Congress in Argentina passed a key law to reboot the economy. The debate began on Thursday afternoon and ended 15 hours later with 134 votes in favor and 110 against. The law on social solidarity and the reactivation of production introduces an economic emergency to overcome the crisis left by the neoliberal policies of Mauricio Macri. The new government says it needs to give help to those who are suffering most from poverty. While some far-left lawmakers said the law was mainly aimed at dealing with the IMF.
The emergency is an exceptional situation, which we didn't generate, but which we need to address urgently because we are not just talking about economic data. We are talking about people, Argentines who are suffering and are waiting for the state to find a solution.
Minister Guzman said that this law is needed to negotiate with the International Monetary Fund. Article 2, paragraph A says that all of this is to guarantee the sustainability of the public debt. That's to say that this is to pay the International Monetary Fund.
Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, explains the importance of this law.
So this law was finally passed after an exhaustive debate that went right through the night and produced a number of concessions and new agreements. The law on social solidarity and the reactivation of production aims to put an end to the dreadful crisis in which the previous government of Mauricio Macri left the country, which has really hurt the most vulnerable sectors of society. The lawmakers went through the articles of the law one by one, and President Alberto Fernandez himself followed the whole process. He was in touch with the Speaker of the House and made several suggestions for modifications, including some concessions to small businesses and family farmers. The emergency law will be in force until the end of December next year, and then the government could seek to extend it. Attention now shifts to the Senate, which has to debate the bill and finally pass it into law. That debate is starting this afternoon and will also probably go into the night. This will be the first session of Congress presided over by the new Vice President, Cristina Fernandez. We expect the bill to be approved by the Senate as well, and once it's published in the official gazette, the economic emergency will come into effect, with all these measures directed at tackling the situation of hunger and economic crisis in Argentina. The law will also be an important instrument for negotiating with the IMF on the huge $57 billion bailout loan agreed by the previous government.
Prosecutors in Rio de Janeiro have accused Senator Flavio Bolsonaro, the son of Brazil's president, of laundering over $500,000. The charges come as another blow to the popularity of President Jair Bolsonaro. His eldest son is accused of demanding that employees appointed by his office hand back part of their salaries. This money was then funneled through an upmarket chocolate store partly owned by the senator. Flavio Bolsonaro says the accusations are false. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Muir, explains the significance of this case.
On Wednesday, Rio de Janeiro police raided the apartments of 13 former employees of Senator Flavio Bolsonaro, who's the son of Brazilian far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. According to the police, between 2007 and 2018, when Flavio Bolsonaro was a state congressman for Rio de Janeiro, he maintained a large ghost payroll of employees who never came to work, many of whom lived in other cities, and kicked back large portions of their salaries every month to his aide, Fabricio Queiroz. Now, among these ghost employees, there are 10 relatives of his, through his mother's side of the family, who live in the city of Resende and don't show any signs of ever going into the state legislature in Rio de Janeiro to work. And another troubling thing is two of the employees, former employees on this list, are the wife and mother-in-law of Adriano Nóbrega, who's the leader, the alleged leader of the Escritório do Crime paramilitary militia and death squad that's been implicated in the assassination of former Rio de Janeiro City Councilwoman Marielle Franco. Now, according to the police, over the course of several years, Fabricio Queiroz, the aide to Flavio Bolsonaro, received over 400 deposits into his bank account from these so-called employees who didn't live in the city of Rio de Janeiro. And receiving the money, he would then launder it through real estate transactions and a lot of transactions in this chocolate shop, which recorded, for example, on one day, 21,000 reais of purchases in chocolate. Another disturbing thing is that Queiroz made a deposit of over 25,000 reais to the wife of current President Jair Bolsonaro. So the police are closing their fence around the Bolsonaro family.
We thank Brian Muir for that report. Coming up after the break, Guinea's President Alpha Conde announces a new draft constitution. Stay with us. Welcome back to From South. Ethiopia has launched its first satellite into space. The satellite was developed by Chinese and Ethiopian scientists with financial aid from the Chinese government. It will be used to transmit environmental and weather data to aid agricultural development in the Horn of Africa. The launch makes Ethiopia the 11th African country to have a satellite in space. Egypt was the first in 1998.
Satellite ETRSS-1, which is currently launching from China, will be a foundation for our historic journey to prosperity. I have here around 20 Ethiopians have participated in the launching of the satellite, 15 men and 5 women. In the near future, I believe Ethiopians will do better in the space program. That's my hope.
An ex-Rwandan official has been found guilty of genocide in a Belgium court. 71-year-old Fabien Neretzi faces a life sentence for his role in the 1994 massacre in his country. He was also found guilty of committing 9 war crimes in Rwanda under Belgium's Code of Universal Jurisdiction for the most serious offenses. Neretzi is the first person to be convicted.
All of these elements establish that the accused committed the crime of genocide in Rwanda between 6 April 1994 and 14 July 1994 in the prefectures of Kigali, Ruhengeri, and Gitarama.
It's a remarkably motivated judgment, and it is a judgment that will have an impact not only in Belgium, but also worldwide. It is in fact a judgment that is a first in Belgium, since it is the first time that there has been a conviction for acts of genocide. I think that really it is a judgment that is part of our history and the history of humanity. Guinea's President Alpha Conde has announced a draft new constitution. He said he was going to submit the draft to the country's citizens to approve it, but people have been protesting against the proposal. They say the president wants to use it to justify seeking a third term in office.
I have begun the process of drafting a new constitution by drawing lessons from our political and institutional past and enabling our nation to meet the challenges of present and future times.
The opposition leader in Guyana, Bharat Jagdeo, has warned that if his party returns to government, it will exclude the company which strikes a deal with the current administration to buy the country's first oil. Jagdeo says the caretaker government does not have the power to make those decisions.
Any company that ties up an arrangement now, we've made a decision that when we go to open public tender for the sale of our crude, that's the only way you can go, open public tender. Anyone can bid, not selective companies. That the company that ties up the arrangement with them now shall be excluded from any official when the open public tender is done. That is our position now, because they're knowingly entering into a contract with a government that has its powers reduced and that is known for its venality. That shouldn't be tying up any such arrangements before the elections.
Trinidad and Tobago's government intends to proclaim the Dangerous Drugs Amendment Bill 2019 on Monday. The bill seeks to decriminalize the possession of a maximum of 30 grams of cannabis and makes other provisions for the use of the previously prohibited drug.
We discussed and what we approved was the proclamation of what was passed in the Parliament. That now opens the door for a lot of those things to happen.
Jamaica's National Solid Waste Management Authority will introduce sexual harassment and internal whistleblower policies to clean up its image earlier next year. 4 years ago, the NSWMA was branded one of the most corrupt state entities.
We also we've worked on our policies internally, and we're now putting in place a whistleblower policy, which we're hoping to effect early in 2020, so that our employees can call an independent place and report anything that they think is wrong within the organization. And secondly, we're putting in place a sexual harassment policy, which is in train.
It's been 60 days since Chileans decided they'd had enough of neoliberalism. Let's take a look at the demonstrations against the government of President Sebastián Piñera.
Zero tolerance, alone or accompanied, for anyone trying to set foot in Dignidad Square, formerly Plaza Italia, will be treated like this.
We haven't won anything yet. The only answer so far is the answer the right wing has always given, the historical response offered by the government, answering calls from social movements with more repression.
Ayelen is one of the young people who woke Chile up last October 18th by jumping the metro turnstiles after the announcement of fare increases. They said enough is enough for a country reeling from neoliberal abuses. Thousands went out onto the streets, demanding deep changes in the social model. Italia Square became the symbol of the dignity that demonstrators demand. Sergio lives a few meters away. His street is now a center to attend victims of repression, and its walls show what the mainstream media in Chile conceals.
I found graffiti that said that democracy was a setup, and something that we've not really focused on is that we never had a democracy. This was always a setup, a democracy led by a group of corrupt businessmen and submissive politicians who turned on us for money. We're seeing more often, and it's confirmed by official media and on the streets, that common sense points to another path.
There are more and more people being wounded on the streets. 357 people have suffered eye trauma in one or both eyes as a product of police violence. There are nearly 4,000 injured.
I wouldn't say that we haven't won anything. There are improvements. For me, the central improvements is that the social movements changed the political agenda. They weren't talking about a new constitution and definitely not a constituent assembly. They didn't talk about reviews of the neoliberal model implemented by the dictatorship through blood and fire.
The government and the deputies, including the opposition, have tried everything to calm the demonstrations. Cash bonuses, a peace agreement, and the offering of a referendum to change the constitution. But so far, without gender equality, without assistance for independent workers, and without parliamentary representations reserved for indigenous people.
The Chilean population is now seeing what the indigenous population have been fighting against for 500 years, from colonization onwards. The Chilean people saw it 30 years ago, and it's been particularly emphasized from 2 months ago.
Chileans are calling for a constituent assembly, but despite the results of a citizen consultation with 83% of citizens favoring this as a means to cut ties with the Pinochet dictatorship, the government isn't offering anything meaningful.
The government's input so far has been shallow answers without touching upon any aspect of the real needs. What we want is for the opinions of Chileans to be heard regarding the need for deeper reforms in matters of pensions, health and education.
I think that we haven't won anything because there has to be an institutional change. We have advanced socio-culturally. It's true. We have settled some issues, but there has to have an institutional correlation. There has to be a constitution through a sovereign and popular assembly.
But this is yet to be seen. While on the streets, the police are seeking to take control without regard for the consequences.
Coming up after the break, the ICC in The Hague is to launch an investigation into alleged war crimes in the occupied Palestinian territories. Stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is to launch an investigation into alleged war crimes in the occupied Palestinian territories. The ICC's chief prosecutor made the announcement after considering a request made by the Palestinian Authority in 2015.
In brief, I am satisfied, 1, that war crimes have been or are being committed in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. 2, that potential cases arising from the situation would be admissible. And 3, that there are no substantial reasons to believe that an investigation would not serve the interest of justice.
The Israeli Prime Minister reacted angrily to the announcement.
The ICC prosecutor has apparently decided not to dismiss outright the Palestinian claim against the State of Israel. This is a baseless and outrageous decision. The court has no jurisdiction in this case. The ICC only has jurisdiction over petitions submitted by sovereign states, but there's never been a Palestinian state.
Moving on, the jailed WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has given evidence to a Spanish court via video link. Supporters gathered outside the court in London as Assange arrived to testify. The hearing was part of an investigation into his allegations that a Spanish firm spied on him while he was still living in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. His legal team wants the firm charged with violation of privacy, money laundering, and bribery. Assange is facing possible extradition to the United States, where he faces 18 counts of conspiring to hack government computers and espionage.
Well, I very much hope that the Spanish investigation will determine for certain that UC Global was working for the Americans, for the CIA. It will mean that the persecution of Julian Assange by the United States was using illegal methods in order to persecute Julian Assange, which will make his extradition basically illegal to the United States. So I very much hope that the investigation will prove that.
MPs have voted in support of Boris Johnson's Brexit deal in the United Kingdom's House of Commons. This is not unexpected as Johnson won a large majority in the Parliament after the December 12th election. Still, this is the first step towards fulfilling his election pledge to deliver Britain's departure from the European Union by January 31st. Lawmakers voted 358 to 234 to pass the second reading of the legislation. It's been more than 3 years since Britain voted to exit the EU in a referendum in 2016.
The bill ensures that the implementation period must end on the 31st of December next year with no possibility of an extension. And it paves the way for a new agreement on our future relationship with our European neighbours based on an ambitious free trade agreement with no alignment, with no alignment on EU rules, but instead control of our own laws.
Under the Conservatives, this deal will be used as a battering ram to drive us down the path of yet more deregulation and towards a toxic deal with Donald Trump and that will sell out our National Health Service and push up the price of medicines to benefit US drug corporations.
At least 5 more people have died in fresh protests over the controversial citizenship law in India. The latest deaths brings the total number of people who have been killed in clashes between Indian police and demonstrators to 14 in a space of 2 weeks. The demonstrators have insisted they want the law to be revoked as they see it as a way of sidelining the Muslim community. Various organizations in El Salvador that took part in the COP25 summit have defined it as another failure, another missed opportunity. So they say they will continue to promote social programs that protect the environment.
Silvia Gomez breeds black scallops in the mangroves of San Juan, in the west of El Salvador. She visits her nursery regularly since it's her only source of income. She has become a protector of the coastal fauna.
Not for us, but for the future generations, so that they are able to know about the shells, so that they get to know crabs, blue crabs, so that the fauna be preserved and not to continue to deteriorate.
Silvia is one of the beneficiaries of programs promoted by the Salvadorian Ecologic Unit that trains residents in order to combat climate change.
I wasn't aware of how the shells were processed and how they were taken care of. Well, today I know how to take care of them and how not to overexploit them, and also how to raise awareness for people to see that instead of destroying the fauna, they should conserve and take care of it.
Indigenous organizations, churches, and environmentalists described the recently ended COP25 summit as another failure and one less opportunity. They say that the world has been able to see the lack of interest of the industrialized countries on the climate emergency.
This summit is an absolute failure, especially for the less fortunate countries. These countries are in a state of vulnerability, in spite of the fact that they are the least responsible for the climate crisis.
Women Against Climate Change is an example of a way to protect the environment. These women conduct cleaning and reforestation campaigns. The society's participation is the goal of the social movements.
The real change are local, and we as indigenous people have always said that. If you want to change the world, change your perspective, change your vision, and the world will change with you.
Global warming and climate change are concepts that the population now handles with great concern, since their communities are the ones that are more vulnerable to environmental change.
And finally, the Brazilian Ítalo Ferreira has won the World Surfing Championship. Ferreira took the crown at the World Surf League Tour in Hawaii. He beat his fellow Brazilian and former world champion, Gabriel Medina. We leave you with one of his extraordinary rides.
Wanted that lip section to ramp him up. Will he get an opportunity here? Big full rotation.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Until next time.